yeah. Good stuff. Well, it is Mother's Day, and let's just talk about some super moms, shall we? Seems like the thing we ought to do. So here's the deal. Here's the deal. Where's Joyce Britton at? Is she back here, or did she have to take off? She maybe had to take off for Mother's Day. But when I saw Joyce on Wednesday, I said, "Hey, Joyce, have I got a deal for you? You can do this super mom thing, and we'll dress you up in a cape, and we'll fly you in with the wires hanging from the ceiling, and we'll just drop you down. It'll be awesome." And she said, "No." Maybe that's why she's gone. She was here earlier, but I think she maybe have to go for Mother's Day. But whatever the case is, didn't get that worked out. But anyways, that video kind of reminds us, or it does remind us of how super moms can really be. It talked about in the video of working hard and being courageous and encouraging us and discerning and multitasking and being a listener and being an advisor and an earth shaker. And then you got to the second part of that video, and it's kind of the wait, there's more, but there's that part of where you see that super moms are mighty women of God, depending on Christ and believing in the Word, and are women who pray and are clothed in power. They are gifts from above. They are indeed facts of expression of God's love. So I want to talk about that today. And when I'm talking about super moms, I'm talking about the mighty women of God, all right? So it's not necessarily specifically biologically moms, because not everybody's had the greatest experience. We got to acknowledge that. Not everybody was able to be a mom. There's a variety of things that can happen that don't make this the greatest of days. And yet, on the other hand, I want to lift up those things that are important about the super moms, meaning that those women of God who play a role as moms in our lives. Indeed, those biologically, those who are spiritually, those that can be teachers, whatever the case may be. So I want to talk about that today. And guys, you're not off the hook, all right? Because all of these are transferable concepts for us as men today, too. So just know that as we move forward. Now, when I think of the word super, and if you look at definitions, there's kind of some weird definitions out there for super, defined as over and above, higher in quantity, quality, or degree than, or more than. I like this one better, where surpassing all or most others of its kind, beyond great, excellent, superior. Those are good adjectives to define and describe a super mom. Now, when speaking of persons, moms in this case, often we think of describing them by the things that they do. So often, super moms, women of God, we talk about the things that they've done, and thus we categorize them as super. But I'd like to talk more than just the things that women have done, but just the fact of who they are, okay? Their character, their virtues, those types of things today. So I want to look at a few verses in Proverbs, and most of you have heard a sermon, I'm sure, over the years, if you've gone to church, a Mother's Day sermon from Proverbs 31. But I want to start with chapter 1 before we get to 31. Chapter 1, and then I'll bracket it in the last chapter. But chapter 1, verses 7 through 9, so follow along, if you will, from Proverbs 1, 7 through 9, okay? So, kick that scripture up there if you can find it. I had to recruit, so thank you, Greg, very much for helping us. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck. We'll stop there. Let's start with this point today. Super moms fear the Lord. All right? That's what we're going to talk about. Super moms fear the Lord. Now, here's a picture of some women that are very important to me. On the left is my mom, Betty, okay? And then the next picture is Mary Lou there, the second from the left, and our daughters-in-law, okay? Every one of these godly women. I mean, no brag, just fact, and a lot of brag probably too. All right? But it's very true. My mom, a godly woman, loves Jesus, raised us up that way. Mary Lou doing the same with me, our children, and then our daughters-in-law. Andrea on the left, the middle son's wife. They have 2 kids. Melissa, Todd, the oldest, his wife, they have 2 kids. And Molly is waiting to have kids, praying about that. And so we love them dearly, and they are incredible women of God. They just are. And they fear the Lord. I'm blessed with these godly women in my life. And on the outlaw side as well. You know what I mean by outlaw? My mother in-law. Strong Christian as well. Okay? So blessed there in the same way. Now, when I was putting this sermon together on Wednesday, my mom had just been taken to the hospital with what were deemed to be possible heart attack conditions. Symptoms, I should say. So I'm writing a Mother's Day sermon, and Mom's in the hospital, and we're not quite sure what's going on. And long story short, it seems like her blood sugar had gotten really low. She likes to get on a treadmill first thing in the morning without eating, just jumping on it, and she had some kind of vertigo-like things happening and sweaty and all this kind of stuff. JP, you'd have to tell me if that makes sense or not, but be that as it may, she was in the hospital. Some of you nurses can help me with that too, but she's fine. I talked to her this morning. All is good, so we're very happy about that. It makes this Mother's Day sermon a little easier for me than if it would have been another direction. But be that as it may, we're looking at Proverbs and the fact that there are godly women who exhibit what this writer is trying to say to us. And verse 7, it's very important that we begin this way. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And that's what I put here, when I had the children's story. I love my mom because she fears the Lord. She really does. Now, what we mean by that is not words that have to do with being afraid, okay? It's not that. It's this. Fear means this: a reverent obedience to the Lord. That's what it means in the Hebrew, okay? A reverent obedience to the Lord. And in that understanding, it includes worship, like we're doing today, as we gather together today to worship corporately and then even individually. Adoration, where we spend time in the adoration of who God is through Jesus Christ. We don't do a very good job of that. Let's just be honest. Think about your own prayer time. More often in prayer time, what do? We spend more time in prayer asking God for something. Intercessory. And so we're really called to spend some time in adoration, in just lifting up and worshiping God for who He is. Faithful, merciful, gracious, loving, etc. Those kind of things. And then included in this understanding is a devotion to everyday conduct, the way that we live our lives. To use a big theological term, not all that big, but you've heard it, it's theocentric in its understanding. I mean, it's God-centered. In all that we do, God is to be the center of that. And super moms get that. Included in this understanding of fear, not being afraid, remember, reverent obedience, is this. It's that moral rightness. Principles, morality are those principles that concern the difference between right and wrong and good and bad behavior, okay? And so that's what this word is helping us understand. And it is this fear that is the beginning of knowledge. Now, interestingly enough, when you do a little word study on that word knowledge, you realize it's a parallel term with the word fear. And so those two words go together when it comes to obedience and obedience to God, okay? So it includes that, and it moves it to that higher sense where it is more than just a starting point. Even though it says the beginning of knowledge, it's not merely just a starting point. It is the foundation and the ceiling. It's all-inclusive. It's all-encompassing of this God that we serve, that we come to understand and know Him. And so that's what's going on. Now, all of us, I think somewhere in our lives, we all are impacted by the lives of supermoms. Some woman in our life has impacted us in a great, great way. In the way that we act, in the way that we talk, in the way that we treat others, And if you think about moral rightness, what I said before, that's what's happening here. It's living that out because of someone's impact on our lives, some godly woman. The fearing of the Lord defines supermoms. Now, if you look at Proverbs, you realize that, and we see it in verse 7, but you realize that there are many contrasts, especially in wisdom literature like it is here. But there's these contrasts. On the one hand is the fear of the Lord, which is the beginning of knowledge. And so there are those who are fearful. But in contrast, there are those who are fools. Okay? There are those who are fools. Notice in verse 7, the last half of that, it says, "But fools despise wisdom and instruction." Those who fear the Lord, those who are fools, which leads to the second point, supermoms are not fools. Supermoms fear the Lord and thus are not fools by virtue of their fear in the Lord. Now look at this picture here. See, I don't know if it makes any sense to you. You remember Mr. T? Yeah? Mr. T, what you talking about, fool? I love my mama. Yeah? You know, some of you might be too young for Mr. T. You got to Google him and figure him out a little bit. We're still trying to. But he talked about this stuff, and, you know, he's pointing out saying, listen, this is what he was really saying. Listen, you got a godly mama? She's no fool. So what you talking about, fool? I love my mama. That's what he's saying. That's just a little bit underneath it all, right? I exegeted the text. Oh, mercy. I'm glad a few of you got that. I'm feeling good now. I'm going to make it the rest of the sermon now. Thank you. But you see, there's a lot of fools out there, but not supermoms, okay? Now, a fool in this text and in this definition in the Hebrew is much more than a person who acts unwisely, but one who is morally deficient. That's what it means. A fool in Hebrew means morally deficient, morally bad, in fact, even one who is evil. Fools do not fear the Lord, for those who fear the Lord are morally upright. But if you're morally deficient, you're not fearing the Lord. So there's these contrasts that are playing out. Now, part of the role of a godly mom is to exemplify and to teach what it means to fear God. And that's why I lifted up about my mom, you know, in that role. And I know she said, mercy, oh mercy, about us kids, you know. But she had a role to play, and she did it well in raising us up in the faith. Mary Lou the same way. Our daughters-in-law doing the same thing as we talk to our grandkids. It's amazing to see how that plays out. We have very, very important roles to play, friends, in the lives of our kids and their kids and their kids, and on we go. But if you notice, obedience and worship of God is very key here in this understanding of a godly mom who fears the Lord. Obedience and worship before Him. Teaching that which is right, or the difference between right and wrong. And Scripture will tell us that when we teach the difference between what is right and what is wrong, that leads to wisdom. That means we are wise. And it is wise, or as I've been known to say, it behooves us to obey. All right? Obedience is key. Over and over and over and over in Scripture, God reminds us the consequences of the positive if we obey and the negative if we choose not to. And so this is played out by our godly moms, our godly women in our lives who teach us to obey. Disobedience leads to a void of wisdom and instruction, to that void, to where we are not able to discern. The fool despises wisdom and instruction, Scripture says here. Hates it. Now, wisdom is an interesting term here because it's not just one little term of applying knowledge. You know, if you're going to understand wisdom, you apply knowledge. If you don't, you're not very wise. But wisdom includes some other things here. It includes the combination of one, observation. So if I'm going to be wise in the life of the church, in the life of Asbury, in the life of where we're going as far as our direction, I need to pay a lot of attention. I need to observe what's going on, both here and around us. That's what godly moms, that's what super moms do. Careful planning. You just don't get all reactionary. Okay? Prudent conduct. You know, you've heard, wouldn't be prudent. Well, we need to be prudent in our conduct, the way we live. And, of course, the sensitivity to God's will. when Cain's up here, I was feeling for him because I remember those days when we had to tell the church we were going to leave and talk about the call, and he did really good. I couldn't believe. He made it through really good. But there's a sensitivity to the call about saying, okay, God, we hear you. We're sensitive to your spirit. We seek to obey. Now we're walking through the door. And now you're walking through the door. Now, hang on, baby. Fasten those seatbelts. So here we go. Here we go. Now, instruction depicts discipline and correction. Now, that's important, and a lot of us don't like it, honestly. A lot of us don't like discipline. A lot of us don't like instruction. A lot of us are like this. It's like the tail wagging the dog. The tail would rather wag the dog. The student would rather tell the teacher what's right. The child would rather tell dad or mom what is right. And all that, and pretty soon you have a culture like ours. Isn't it amazing? Where the tail wags the dog. And so, we try to be such friends all the time that we've not reached out to be the parents we've been called to be and set a few parameters along the way because we love our children so much that here's the parameters, lest you get hurt. When the tail wags the dog, it's like, I won't get hurt, I know what I'm doing. And then they all of a sudden show up at your doorstep when they get hurt. And so we have these things that play out. A super mom is no longer super if she despises wisdom and instruction. She'd really be a fool then. That's the contrast setting up. So it moves us into these next couple of verses where it says in verses 8 and 9, listen, my son, it can be daughter too, to your father's instructions, and do not forsake what? Your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck. Now, it's important for us. We kind of blow by this because in our culture we don't think a lot about this. But you got to realize this was written a few years ago. It's still relevant for us today, but we need to understand the context a little bit. It's important to note the role of the mother's teaching in this text in a day where there is no similar reference in any of the Egyptian or in the Babylonian wisdom literature. There wasn't anything like that in that other literature, but here all of a sudden there is a prominent role of Israel's mothers being lifted up. The importance of it. You wouldn't ever have heard about that anywhere else. But God, in His providence, saw fit to speak towards that here. Wonderful. It says a father's instruction. We talk about father's instruction, but you see what that has to do with is correction and discipline. Now, those of you who had fathers, well, let me ask you this. This should be for Father's Day, but so save it a little bit. But those of you who had fathers who weren't fearful about sharing their understanding of discipline and instruction. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And so, that's really what is being lifted up here as far as saying, here's the parameters, don't go beyond them, okay? Lest there be consequences. The mother's role here, it says, while mom's teaching, literally is this Hebrew word Torah. You know what the word is? You know what that means? What does that mean? The law. It means the teaching. It's the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The Pentateuch, the Torah, the law. And so mom taught the law, if you will, the Torah. Now, it wasn't pushed as far as Moses' understanding here, but it's the same Hebrew word. And it's those things that are necessary, the necessary instructions for a wise and godly life. And mom played a role in that. Now, those of you who know anything about Mr. John Wesley, he had a wife. Anybody know what her name was? Susanna. Old Susanna. You remember they wrote a song about her. And so anyways, Susanna taught hundreds and hundreds of people. First starting with her children and then moving out. And the men of that day in England said, Samuel, the husband, tell your wife to be quiet. She's getting too many people in her church. Now, that's my language. But there's too many. There's 200 people showing up to hear Susanna. They finally let her talk because she was making a difference in people's lives. Because of the instruction, because of the Torah, if you will, that she was passing on. It says these things are observed like a chain or a necklace that adorns the neck. There's that adorning around the head or around the neck. People would see it. They'd know there's a reason of celebration. There's a reason of honor and so forth that plays out. So you see, the fear of the Lord, it actually comes last for the fool, but not for those who fear him. If you fear the Lord, it is the beginning of wisdom, and the foolishness is behind. The reality here is this. The fool mentioned here is not so much stupid as is evil. That's really what's going on. Evil. Super moms are not fools, nor are they evil. Otherwise, they wouldn't be super. That's why they're super, because they fear the Lord. They fear the Lord. Thirdly, super moms are praised. Okay? Super moms fear the Lord. Super moms are not fools. As a result, super moms are praised. Now, the Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, there's 31 chapters in there. How many have read the whole book of Proverbs at some point in your life? Okay, I encourage you to do so. Now, you may get your eyes glazed a little bit, because once you get about past, the first 8 or 9 chapters, all of a sudden some things change, and there's all these sayings, saying after saying after saying. In the first 9 chapters, there's a compilation of instructive speeches, and that's where we're at right now. This instruction for those of us to follow the Lord, that as we do so, we fear him out of obedience, etc., etc., etc. Reverent obedience. Then in the last chapters, 10 through 31, it's full of wisdom sayings. I mean, verse after verse after verse. I wish my brains worked better than they do, because I can't memorize like I used to. But man, I wish I'd have memorized more of them. I got to just keep working at it. There's so many good sayings there. But here's the deal. Here's my picture, all right? This is my story, and I'm sticking to it, all right? So here's my picture of Proverbs, wisdom literature. You don't read it. You don't just read it literally, all of it. You just don't read it like you would read prose or history or some of these other things. These are some things to help us understand life in a generalized, overarching, observational way. And so the wise sage, if you will, is sitting up on top of the mountain. That's how I see it. And the wise sage sees all these things and observes all these things and passes along the wisdom to those who come to him or her based upon what's been observed. Much like my friend Susan here. Those of you know she had a birthday yesterday. I need to pick on her 2 times in one day. All right? But there's this picture that Steve puts of her on Facebook for her birthday. And here's Susan sitting up on top of this mountain. There's these mountains around. And I'm going, this is too good to be true. This is awesome. Here's Susan, the wise sage, the perfect example of the one who has observed and is now passing along great wisdom of those who come to her, and she passes it along to them because she's stood and watched it all happen before her. That's why she's on our staff. Right? 1, she's observed. 2, she's wise. And 3rd, she cares for people. That's why she's congregational care. There we go. There you go. Fist bump. Bam. All right. We're going to keep you another week. Don't you get up next week and do a cane thing. Me and God will have a talk about that. All right. Okay. All right. Just saying. All right. So here's this going on, and so in these later chapters we see these wise sayings, and the first bunch of chapters, it's not written specifically so much for women, specifically for moms, and yet the concepts are very much there, okay? But you get to chapter 31, and lo and behold, guess what? It is written about a woman. It is written about a godly woman. It is written about a godly wife. And in reality, for today's sermon, it is written about a godly super mom. Notice in verse 30. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be what? Praised. To be praised. Now, chapter 31 has a heading that says, the sayings of Lemuel. Lemuel was not of Israel descent. He was of non-Israelite origin. We've got to understand there are wise people outside of Israel that put a few words here and there, and we need to listen. And so these were written down. And it's so interesting because it says in verse 1, it was an inspired utterance his mother taught him. So they may be his words, but they first came from mom. They were mother's words first. And he's now passing them on. That sounds like a super mom to me. I don't know about you. And the rest, verses 10 through 31, it's this acrostic poem where they take the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet and then they build the whole chapter off of that, talking about an excellent woman, a.k.a. supermom. And it says charm is deceptive. Now, if you look at the word charm, it means this in the Hebrew. It means favor or elegance or grace. It has to do with appearance. But it says this. He goes on to say, this charm is deceptive. Be careful. It's deceitful. It denotes lies and falsehoods. And he couples that with this next word of beauty. And in the Hebrew, it has to do with that of attractiveness. But we must be very careful because he says beauty is fleeting or vain. It points to the fact that without a reverent obedience to the Lord, there is no beauty. And let me just sidestep for just a second. This is so important in our culture today. In our Western culture, Europe, it's moved here to America, and it's pushed farther on now. But especially for our younger girls, and it starts here. They are brainwashed to believe that they are not pretty if they don't have this particular feature on their face, if they don't have this particular hairstyle, if they don't have this particular hair color, if they don't have this later on, this particular figure, if they don't have this, if they don't have this, if they don't have this. And so the billboards are out there, the commercials on TV are everywhere, everything in the People magazines and all those magazines saying to the girls, you must have this, you need this. If you don't have this, the implication is you are ugly. That's our culture. And they're being raised in this, and they begin to believe it. And we need to counter that by telling our young girls, my granddaughter's this high already, and older through high school and beyond, that beauty is not just about the look, the attractiveness, the makeup, the hair, those kind of things that equate beauty in our culture. It is that which identifies them as one of God's very own people. Their identity is found in Jesus Christ, not in the looks, not in all the perfume smells, not in all the makeup, not of that stuff. We are doing our women a disservice by saying you are not beautiful if you don't have this. Shame on us. As Christians, we must do better to help our young women, our girls, our women, and women as a whole, because we can all believe this. And guys fall into this other trap too, in a variety of ways, that beauty, charm, it's deceptive, it's fleeting, it's vain. Don't let anyone or culture define it. God defines it for you by saying, you are mine. You are mine. Notice in verse 30, the one who is charmed and beautiful is the woman who fears the Lord and is to be praised. Notice, the one who's charmed and beautiful, this person is the one who fears the Lord. So you see, today, we praise our super moms. We praise them because they fear the Lord. You are here, women, I believe, because you fear the Lord. I hope you're not here just because there's a donut in there or coffee out there or Sarah did a good job of the pictures out there. I appreciate that. That's all great stuff. But there's much more to it. And this Mother's Day is about you, godly moms, roles of mothers, grandmothers, teachers. You can do all sorts of things to make a difference in people's lives. You're here because you fear the Lord, and today we honor you. So at the end it says this. Here's how Proverbs ends. Honor her for all that her hands have done. Let her works bring her praise at the city gate. Oh, you hear it? Now, this does include a few things that the godly woman has done. But it's because of who she is, based upon a fear of the Lord. So as our praise team comes up here, they need to come up here. So as our praise team comes on up, here's the deal. Today, women, we praise you. We honor you. We thank you. We're so happy that because of you, other people's lives have been impacted. Not just your own children, although that's taken place, but others as well. You know, Mark Homan's mom, when she was out there at Leota, she was a teacher, and she'd go around, and they didn't know it, but she was a teacher, and she'd just put her hands on them, and she'd just pray over them. They didn't know it. She was just praying over them, and those are the godly moms we're talking about. Things happen. So we honor you, and we're grateful, and we sing a song that has to do with praise. It's called the New Doxology, and it's the praising of the Lord we serve. Let's stand as we sing it together, shall we? Let's stand.